if that's if that's the text as we get it, now let's look at possibilities for what about that character the angel anticipates with Zechariah. What about that character warrants a whole chapter of focus in this gospel? Because he's going to get another chapter in chapter 3, but this comes before the main act shows up, before the Grateful Dead hits the stage. And so the second step here is what actually happened? What was John in real life? And we know that he's been sort of reduced to a pointer in the Advent season largely. But let's take a look. Here's from Luke 3. With many other exhortations, John proclaimed the good news to the people. This is coming in Luke 3:15 through 20. But Herod the ruler, who had rebuked by him because of Herodias, his brother's wife, and because of all the evil things that Herod had done, added to them all by shutting up John in prison. So this is a familiar part of Jesus' story in the other Gospels, that John goes to prison, and that matters for the timing of Jesus's beginning in the beginning of Jesus's ministry. The coin is Herod Antipas, and this is about Herod's reason for putting John away, which in this gospel and in the other gospels is because he criticizes Herod's love life, right? The reason given in the gospels for John to be thrown in the dungeon is that he's getting on Herod's nerves because he's criticizing his love life. But I want to look at Josephus. Josephus was a Jewish historian who was well placed among the Romans, who is responsible for a lot of the knowledge we have about things we wouldn't know about if it weren't for his writings. And one of them is a little more insight into who John is and what he was in his environment. This is Josephus talking about why Herod put John away. Now, some of the Jews thought that the destruction of Herod's army came from God, and he was a very just and was a very just punishment for what Herod did against John, called the Baptist or the Dipper. For Herod had him killed, although he was a good man, and had urged the Jews to exert themselves to virtue, both as to justice toward one another and reverence towards God, and having done so, to join together in washing. When others massed about him, in other words, when he drew great crowds, for they were very greatly moved by his words, Herod, who feared that such strong influence over the people might carry to a revolt, for they seemed ready to do anything that John should advise, Herod believed it much better to move now than later have it raise a rebellion and engage him in actions he would regret. And so John, out of Herod's suspiciousness, was sent in chains to Machaerus, the fort previously mentioned, and there put to death. But it was the opinion of the Jews that out of retribution for John, God willed the destruction of the army so as to afflict Herod. So I want to sit with this for a second before we go on to the next slide. So I want us to recognize the difference between Herod's motive in the gospel, not only Luke, but in Matthew, also in Mark. In those, Herod is annoyed with John, so he puts him in a dungeon. And then there's a later intrigue, of course, that ends up one of the courtesans gets Herod drunk and basically convinces him to take off John the Baptist's head, right? That story is well known to us because it's in the Gospels. But notice the difference between that story, in which John is playing the role of a prophet, and the king gets mad at him and puts him away, on the one hand, and the story in Josephus, which is John was so popular that Herod had to fear rebellion if John said the word. If John said to the people, let's take the palace, the people would take the palace. That's the implication of Josephus. And there would be hell to pay for Herod. Now, what am I saying? I'm not saying that the intrigue of Herod's love life wasn't a part of all this. I think the Gospels are probably accurate about that. I am saying that if we get the wider canvas, John was a big, big deal, apart from being the act that warmed up for Jesus. John had followers in multitudes who even scared a ruler like Herod Antipas.